I just wanted to show where we are, really, because I don't know, like Alex asked yesterday, how many of you actually have been to Jersey and the Channel Islands? Oh, I'm really impressed. That's probably about a third of the audience. Excellent. Some of you may have attended the GPA conference we held last year. Excellent. We have a couple of people. But I'm just going to talk a little bit more about us as a regulator. We're a small team. There's 19 of us in total. We regulate both data protection and the Freedom of Information Jersey law. And our mandate, exactly as Bradley was saying, is very much split into two parts. We're fundamentally about enforcement, which you would expect as a regulator, but also a huge chunk of our work is outreach and education. Yes, we go into schools and do the planned activities with young people ranging from junior right the way through secondary, but more important is outreach with industry, hence the piece about collaboration, a theme that we're all talking about. But as a regulator, we want to be proactive in supporting our economy as well. And I'm going to talk about a case study shortly to demonstrate exactly that. We also have work on a regulators forum, so we collaborate with other regulators in the island as well as other DPAs across the world as well. We provide guidance, templates, resources for industry to help them, because our view is if actually our industry does well, that's better for our economy, but it doesn't mean we're shy of regulating and enforcing. Our strategic outcomes are really focused on driving innovation, driving change, but making sure that Jersey is a jurisdiction well placed and our economy will thrive. I'm going to talk about trust a little bit, but first of all, we're going to talk about trust and why Jersey, collaboration overall as a theme, and then a little bit more about the view from us, Jersey Office of the Information Commissioner, about data trust. Jersey is a well-regulated jurisdiction. We've got a great reputation. We're a robust community of regulated entities, and particularly trust companies. There's over 50 trust companies in Jersey alone. We're a collaborative environment. Actually, we've got the blessing of being really small and also the blight of being really small. One of our key advantages is, like all my colleagues here, we can actually get most of the key people in the room at any one time. We can call a meeting, we can get all the players who need to make a decision to come round over a cup of tea, and that works very well. Of course, the opposite side of that is, as a small jurisdiction, when it comes to data protection, people can easily become identifiable. Plus, as well, maybe the depth of expertise isn't always there. So we're always mindful of where we sit and how we can leverage other people to help and support us. Why a trust in Jersey? Why a data trust? As you can see on the screen, fundamentally, a data trust, or a trust, if we stick to the purity of a trust, has a three-pronged approach. There's somebody who wants to put something into a trust, the settler. There's somebody who's going to benefit from the trust, the beneficiary. And then somebody who's responsible for making sure that trust functions according to the rules, the trustee. I'm no trust lawyer, so if you have any trust lawyer type questions, save them for somebody else. I'm looking about data trust. Just putting it out there. Just setting the scene. Bit like Bradley, we always use, and there are other F1 teams available just in case anyone's slightly precious about it. But I think it's really important to remember that data protection relies on all of us working together. And that's no more so than the data trust example that we're going to look at. We as a regulator want to make sure people can talk to us and approach us, because without that collaboration, a lot of the innovation and the projects wouldn't get off the ground. But more importantly, it's making sure, and I'm so heartened to hear in other presentations so far this conference, people talking about training. As regulators, we know all too often, organisations just don't invest in the correct, bespoke, fit-for-purpose training for their teams. And I think F1 is a great example of where training is key. Everyone in that pit stop crew needs to know their role. The guy on the jack at the front of the car doesn't suddenly decide he's going to do the refuelling, or doesn't pass comment maybe on how somebody's putting a wheel on. Not very mechanical either. However, I think what's really important is when it comes to something as innovative as data trust or any project, that we all know our place. We as a regulator know our place in that. The data analyst knows their place. The trustee in this situation knows their place. But we respect each other and our roles. In Jersey, we actually undertook a small project. Clearly, we sat back, we were the regulator. Digital Jersey ran the project to see whether the trust model could indeed be used. And I like the way Bradley said about that you had due diligence on steroids. Data trusts are in fact like multi sort of sharing, data sharing on steroids as well. But we did a life cycle data trust pilot to see if in fact data could be stored, gathered, shared and governed under the trust mechanism. It's quite short term, as you'll see on the dates there, and fundamentally we recruited, we were the regulator, a group of Jersey cyclists were recruited because the aim of the trust was to understand cycling behaviours, to see if we could improve road surfaces, make sure junctions worked, if there were potholes, routes, where there were pinch points where maybe the traffic was a problem. So the bike light was settled into the Jersey Trust. And then they gave them access to the data coming off the bike lights. Now, one of the challenges we had in Jersey was very much because we wanted to break down the data for this into various segments. As soon as you had maybe somebody who was a disabled cyclist from one part of the island, and if you narrowed it down, they could become identifiable. So one of the areas we had to work very, very closely on with the people setting up and governing the trust was to make sure there was transparency, because that was one of the areas that people were aiming for the finish line without thinking necessarily about the implications of the individuals. And again, just the transparency of the privacy policies to understand exactly what was happening with their data. So it was a lot of work was front-loaded. But as you'll see at the end, it was a success. Data was collected, use cases were put forward, and the data was, all the personal information has now gone, so the data sits there in the short term for use cases to be put forward. Most importantly, though, what's the view from the regulator? Now, clearly, it's important governance around the information in there, but we wanted to see and make sure that data protection was built in from the very beginning, and that a DPIA was undertaken. Now, in this case, they didn't necessarily have to bring it to us. There was no high-risk processing involved. But we were very collaborative in that process. We sat round the table. We argued over matters. We pulled it apart. But the transparency back to those involved was the main area of focus for us. As Bradley says, we tend to forget when we're sitting maybe in our ivory towers or you're seeking for monetising projects. This is all about people, so that's where we come in very strongly to make sure that the people are protected and there's thorough governance around everything. A big one of that is making sure the individual rights can be satisfied within the trust model. And as I've already mentioned, the challenges of being both a small jurisdiction, the sweet spots we have with it, but also the disadvantages of that. I couldn't end without having another Formula One racing car, could I? But I think the takeaways from us are that, as I mentioned, it's personal information. Check it first. All too often we get asked as a regulator if somebody can do something and they're not even using personal information. Let's come back to the basics. If we take away, when I was preparing for this, almost the trust functionality became a red herring for me. This is all about data sharing and accessed by different users. So it's making sure there's good governance around the information, that where it can be anonymised, where it's stored. Go back to the basic principles of the data protection law when you're thinking about data sharing. Let's not get too complicated. Let's think simply about it. Plan well, put good governance around the information, go back to the principles.